My son told me I was dead to him on my 65th birthday. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, choking and bitter. Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who destroy us completely. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show that we're strong together. My name is Margaret Rose Thompson, and for 43 years, I believed that love meant giving until you had nothing left. I'm 71 now, sitting in my small apartment in downtown Chicago, where the radiator clanks like an old man's bones, and the wallpaper peels in corners that haven't seen fresh paint since Carter was president. The morning light filters through windows I can barely reach to clean anymore, casting long shadows across photographs that tell the story of a life spent in service to others. This morning, like every morning for the past 3 years, I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of contentment, but the hollow echo of abandonment that fills every corner of this place I've learned to call home. The coffee maker gurgled to life, the same $20 machine I bought at Walmart when I first moved here, when I still thought this was temporary, when I still believed my family would come for me. I shuffled to the kitchen in the pink terry cloth slippers my granddaughter Emma gave me for Christmas 5 years ago, back when she still returned my calls. The slippers are worn thin now, the fabric pilled and stained, but I can't bring myself to throw them away. They're proof that once, someone thought about what might make me comfortable, what might bring me joy. The apartment smells like yesterday's cooking. Canned soup and instant oatmeal, the diet of someone whose Social Security check doesn't stretch far enough for fresh vegetables and whose hands shake too much to hold heavy pots. I used to cook for 12 every Sunday, spreading my dining room table with roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and apple pie made from scratch. The house would fill with laughter and arguments and the chaos of 3 generations trying to fit around one table. Now I eat standing at my kitchen counter, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs on the fire escape outside my window. Today is different, though. Today marks exactly 3 years since the last time I heard my son Michael's voice, and 2 years since Emma stopped responding to my letters. Today is the anniversary of the morning I realized that everything I'd given, every dollar, every sleepless night, every piece of my soul, had been taken for granted and then forgotten entirely. The phone rang at exactly 9:47 a.m., jerking me from memories I usually keep locked away. For one wild, desperate moment, my heart leaped with the possibility that someone, anyone, was calling to check on me. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize, and my hands trembled as I pressed the green button. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Midwest Financial Services." My stomach dropped. Not family. Never family. Just another reminder that I'd co-signed for Michael's business loan 3 years ago, that I'd used my retirement savings to help him start the contracting company he'd dreamed about since high school. The same business that was now $30,000 behind in payments, threatening to destroy what little credit I had left. "We need to discuss your outstanding obligations," Jennifer continued, her voice crisp and professional. "The account is significantly overdue, and will need immediate payment to avoid legal action." I sank into my recliner, the one piece of furniture I'd managed to keep when I'd sold everything else to help pay for Emma's college tuition. The brown fabric was threadbare now, worn smooth by the weight of too many lonely evenings, but it still held the shape of my body like an old friend's embrace. I don't have access to that kind of money," I whispered, the words catching in my throat like broken glass. "My son was supposed to handle the payments. The business is in his name. According to our records, Mrs. Thompson, you're listed as the primary guarantor. Mr. Thompson removed himself from the account 18 months ago. 18 months ago. While I was still sending him birthday cards he never acknowledged, still leaving voicemails he never returned, still believing that somewhere deep down, he remembered that I was the one who'd sat by his bedside through pneumonia when he was 7, who'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his soccer cleats, who'd mortgaged my house to help him through his divorce. The betrayal hit me like ice water, shocking and complete. Not only had Michael cut me out of his life, but he'd done it legally, systematically, leaving me holding the debt while he walked away clean. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my chair for what felt like hours, staring at the framed photograph on my side table. Michael and Emma at last year's 4th of July barbecue, the one I wasn't invited to, but saw on Facebook when a neighbor tagged me by accident. They looked so happy, so free, arms around each other against a backdrop of red, white, and blue decorations I would have helped hang if they'd asked. I picked up the frame with shaking hands, tracing my finger along Emma's smile. She had my eyes, the same green that had skipped a generation and landed in her face like a gift. For 22 years, I'd been her grandmother, her confidant, the one she called when her parents fought or when boys broke her heart. I'd taught her to bake cookies and braid her hair, sat through countless dance recitals and school plays, cheered from the bleachers at softball games until my voice was hoarse. Now she was graduating from Northwestern University, the school I'd helped pay for, and I'd learned about the ceremony from a neighbor who'd seen the announcement in the local paper. My own granddaughter, walking across that stage in a cap and gown I'd never see, celebrating a degree my sacrifice had made possible. The worst part wasn't the money. Money could be replaced. Debts could be forgiven. The worst part was the silence, the deliberate erasure of my existence from their lives. I'd become a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness, unwelcome at holidays and birthdays, excluded from weddings and graduations, tolerated only when they needed something I could provide. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Michael, 3 years ago on my 68th birthday. I'd called to invite him to dinner, nothing fancy, just meatloaf and mashed potatoes like he'd loved as a child. His voice had been cold, distant, like he was speaking to a telemarketer rather than the woman who'd given birth to him. "Mom, we've talked about this. Emma's got college, I've got the business, Sarah's got her book club. We don't have time for family dinners anymore. But it's my birthday," I'd said, hating how small my voice sounded, how desperate. "Look, you need to understand something. We're building our own life now. We can't keep carrying the weight of your expectations. Maybe it's time you did the same." Those words had echoed in my head for 3 years. Carrying the weight of your expectations. As if wanting to see my son and granddaughter was a burden too heavy for them to bear. As if the woman who'd sacrificed everything for their comfort and success had become nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed and eventually discarded. I set the photograph face down on the table, unable to look at their smiling faces any longer. Outside my window, Chicago carried on with its relentless rhythm. Cars honking, sirens wailing, the L train rattling past every 15 minutes like a metallic heartbeat. The city was full of life and noise and purpose, but sitting in my small apartment, I felt more alone than I'd ever imagined possible. That night, as I heated another can of soup for dinner, I caught my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Gray hair limp and lifeless, shoulders curved inward from years of carrying burdens too heavy for one person, eyes that had lost their spark somewhere along the way. When had I become so small? When had I learned to take up so little space in my own life? I thought about the sacrifices I'd made over the years, each one seeming reasonable at the time, necessary even. The vacation fund I'd emptied to pay for Michael's wedding, the retirement account I'd cashed out early to help with Emma's private school tuition, the house I'd sold to cover Sarah's medical bills when her insurance wouldn't pay for the cancer treatment that saved her life. Every choice had been made with love, with the absolute certainty that family came first, that my needs could wait, that there would always be time later for my own dreams and desires. But later had turned into never, and need had transformed into expectation, and love had become a one-way street that led nowhere but to this small apartment where I ate soup alone and watched strangers' lives through my window. As I prepared for bed, I found myself wondering if this was all there was left. Endless days of silence punctuated by bills I couldn't pay for a family that had forgotten I existed. Was this what I'd worked so hard for? Was this the legacy of a life spent in service to others? I pulled my thin blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes, trying to block out the questions that had no answers, the hurt that had no remedy. Tomorrow would bring another day exactly like this one, and the day after that would be the same, unless something changed. Unless I found the courage to change it myself. But change seemed impossible when you'd spent 71 years believing that your worth was measured by what you could give to others, and you'd finally given everything away. The memories came flooding back like water through a broken dam, each one more painful than the last. I'd been a fool, but a fool with the best intentions, and that somehow made it worse. It started when Michael was 17 and desperate to play varsity football. The equipment cost $300, money we didn't have after his father left us with nothing but debt and broken promises. I worked double shifts at the diner for 2 months, coming home with swollen feet and the smell of grease in my hair, just to see him smile when I handed him that uniform. "Thanks, Ma," he'd said, already distracted by the phone ringing in the next room. "You're the best." I'd been the best at giving, that was for sure. Best at sacrificing. Best at believing that love meant saying yes to everything, even when yes was slowly killing me. When Michael graduated high school, he wanted to go to community college, but couldn't afford the books. I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she'd left me when she died. The pawn shop gave me $400 for a ring that had been in our family for 3 generations. Michael never asked where the money came from. He just took it and walked away. By the time he met Sarah, I'd become the family bank. Need money for a security deposit? Call Mom. Car broke down? Mom will handle it. Medical bills? Mom's got savings. The word no had been surgically removed from my vocabulary, and they'd grown comfortable with my endless generosity. Sarah's pregnancy was complicated. Bed rest for 6 months, no income, medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. I cashed out my 401k. 23 years of retirement savings gone in a single afternoon. The penalty fees alone could have bought me a decent used car. But Emma needed a healthy start in life. And what kind of grandmother would I be if I let money stand in the way of my granddaughter's future? "You're an angel, Margaret," Sarah had whispered from her hospital bed, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "I don't know what we would have done without you. I'd felt like an angel then, glowing with purpose and pride. I was needed. I was essential. I was the foundation that kept their world stable." Emma's childhood became my second career. While Michael and Sarah worked to rebuild their finances, I became the full-time caregiver. Sleepless nights when she had colic, emergency room visits for every fever and cough, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, soccer practice and piano lessons. I was present for every milestone while her parents focused on their careers and their own needs. "Grandma Maggie," Emma would squeal when she saw me, launching herself into my arms with the kind of joy that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. I was her whole world, and she was mine. When Emma turned 10, Michael and Sarah decided she needed to attend private school. The public schools weren't good enough for their daughter. My granddaughter deserved better. The tuition was $12,000 a year, and they couldn't swing it on their salaries. "Mom, you know we wouldn't ask if we had any other choice," Michael had said, sitting at my kitchen table with spreadsheets and brochures scattered between us. "Emma's so smart. This school could change her entire future." I'd mortgaged my house, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, where I'd raised Michael as a single mother, where every room held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings. The bank approved me for enough to cover 3 years of tuition, and I signed the papers without reading them carefully. What did the details matter when Emma's future was at stake? Sarah cried when I told them the news. "Margaret, this is too much. We can't accept this." But Michael had already started making plans, researching admission requirements and scheduling tours. "It's not too much," he'd said firmly. "This is what grandparents do. This is what family does." What family does? I'd repeated that phrase to myself every month when the mortgage payment came due, every time I chose generic groceries over name brands, every winter when I kept the heat low to save money. This is what family does. Emma thrived at Riverside Academy. Honor roll every semester, student council president, accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship that still left $20,000 a year uncovered. By then, I was 67 years old, living on Social Security and the small pension from my decades at the diner. My house was underwater on the mortgage, and my savings account held exactly $43. I could take out student loans, Emma had suggested half-heartedly during Sunday dinner. She was 18 then, beautiful and brilliant, with her whole life stretching ahead of her like an endless highway of possibilities. "Absolutely not," Michael had declared. cutting into his pot roast with the decisive motion of a man accustomed to having his problems solved by others. Student loans would bury her for decades. There has to be another way. They all looked at me. Sarah with her hopeful smile. Michael with his expectant stare. Emma with her trusting green eyes that saw me as the woman who could fix anything, provide anything, sacrifice anything for the people she loved. "I'll figure something out," I'd heard myself say, though I had no idea how. The solution came in the form of a reverse mortgage, a financial instrument I barely understood but desperately needed. The bank explained that I could borrow against my home's equity, receive monthly payments for Emma's education, and continue living in the house until I died. It seemed like a miracle, a way to give Emma her future without destroying my present. I signed the papers on a rainy Thursday morning in October, sitting in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and regret. The monthly payments would cover Emma's tuition and living expenses for 4 years. In exchange, the bank would own my house when I died. But I'd be gone by then anyway. What did it matter? Emma hugged me so tightly that day, her young body vibrating with excitement and gratitude. "Grandma Maggie, you're the most amazing person in the world. I'm going to make you so proud." I was proud. Proud and terrified and completely broke, but proud. The first sign that something had changed came during Emma's sophomore year. She stopped calling every week, then every month. Her visits home became shorter, more distracted. She'd sit at my kitchen table texting friends while I made her favorite cookies, answering my questions about classes and campus life with the minimal enthusiasm of someone fulfilling an obligation. "She's just growing up," Sarah explained when I mentioned Emma's distance. "College kids need their independence. It's normal. Normal." I told myself that word like a prayer, hoping it would ease the growing ache in my chest every time Emma's calls went straight to voicemail. By Emma's junior year, Michael and Sarah had moved to a larger house in a better neighborhood. Michael's contracting business was thriving, and Sarah had been promoted to regional manager at her marketing firm. They hosted dinner parties and took vacations to Europe, posted photos on Facebook of lives that looked perfect from every angle. I wasn't in those photos. "We should have you over soon," Sarah would say whenever we talked, but soon never came. They were busy with work, with friends, with a social life that apparently had no room for an elderly mother and grandmother who'd given them everything. The final blow came during Emma's senior year, when she announced her engagement to a young man named Tyler, whose parents owned a chain of restaurants in California. The wedding would be in Napa Valley, a destination affair that would cost more than I'd spent on food in the previous 5 years. "We wish we could invite everyone," Emma had said during our last phone conversation, her voice bright and cheerful as she described the intimate ceremony they were planning. "But Tyler's family is keeping it really small. Just immediate family and a few close friends." Immediate family. The words echoed in my head for weeks afterward. I wasn't immediate family anymore, despite paying for the education that had led to this engagement, despite being the one constant presence in Emma's life for 22 years. I'd been reclassified as extended family, optional family, forgettable family. I hung up the phone that night and sat in my empty house, surrounded by photographs of a granddaughter who no longer had room for me in her life. The reverse mortgage payments had stopped coming once Emma graduated, and I was living on Social Security alone. The house felt enormous around me, every room echoing with ghosts of the family gatherings that would never happen again. 3 weeks later, Michael called to tell me about the business loan he needed me to co-sign. $50,000 to expand his company, purchase new equipment, hire additional workers. His credit wasn't quite good enough to qualify a loan, but with my signature, the bank would approve the loan immediately. "It's just a formality, Mom," he'd assured me, his voice warm and persuasive in a way it hadn't been for months. "The business is doing great. I'll make all the payments. You won't have to worry about anything. Won't have to worry." I was 70 years old, living in a house I no longer owned, surviving on a fixed income that barely covered utilities and food. But I signed the papers because this is what family does, and because some small, desperate part of me hoped that helping him one more time might earn me a place at Emma's wedding, might restore the connections that had been slowly dissolving for years. That was 3 years ago. I signed those papers on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday I'd been moved out of my house and into this apartment. The reverse mortgage had come due when I signed the business loan, triggering some clause I hadn't understood or bothered to read carefully. The bank took possession immediately, and I had 72 hours to pack up 30 years of memories. Michael helped me move. He showed up with a U-Haul and 2 of his workers, efficiently packing my belongings like they were clearing out a storage unit, rather than dismantling the home where he'd grown up. When we finished, he stood in my new apartment doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking uncomfortable and eager to leave. "This is nice, Mom," he'd said, glancing around the small space with its beige walls and worn carpet. "Cozy, and you won't have to worry about maintenance anymore." Then he'd left, and I hadn't heard from him since. That was when I first whispered the question that haunted me now. Was I used? The answer came slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle I didn't want to complete. Every loan I'd guaranteed, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made, they'd all been accepted without gratitude, expected without question, forgotten the moment they were no longer needed. I'd been a utility, a resource to be depleted, a bank that never closed and never demanded collateral beyond my unconditional love, and now that the account was empty, they'd simply closed it and walked away. The cruelest part wasn't the big betrayals. It was the 1,000 small cuts that slowly bled me dry. My 70th birthday arrived on a Tuesday in March, gray and cold like every other day that winter. I'd always loved birthdays, believed they were sacred, a celebration of someone's existence, proof that their life mattered to the people who loved them. For 49 years, I'd made birthdays magical for my family. Homemade cakes with extra frosting, handmade decorations, carefully chosen gifts I'd saved for months to afford. I woke up that morning with the foolish hope that someone would remember. Maybe just a phone call, a card, something to acknowledge that Margaret Rose Thompson had spent 70 years on this earth, and that her presence had meant something to someone. By noon, my phone hadn't rung. By evening, I was sitting in my armchair, staring at the same phone, willing it to make a sound. Any sound. I'd made myself a cupcake from a box mix, the kind with chemical frosting that tasted like sweetened plastic. I stuck a single candle in it and lit the wick with trembling fingers. The flame flickered in the dark apartment, casting dancing shadows on the walls as I whispered a prayer to anyone who might be listening. "Please," I said to the empty room, "please let someone remember." The candle burned down to nothing. My phone stayed silent. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called Michael myself. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice distracted and slightly annoyed. "Mom, is everything okay? It's kind of late." My voice cracked, and I had to swallow before continuing. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Oh, okay. Well, I'm here. What's going on?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to tell him it was my birthday. I wanted to hear him gasp with recognition and apology. I wanted him to care enough to remember without being reminded. "Nothing," I whispered. I love you. Love you too, Mom. Listen, I've got an early meeting tomorrow, so I should probably get some sleep." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the dark, holding the silent phone, understanding with crystalline clarity that I'd been forgotten completely. Not just overlooked or busy, forgotten. The woman who'd given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for his success, had become so insignificant that her birthday didn't even register in his memory. The phone calls started coming more frequently after that, but never from family. Collection agencies hunting for Michael's missed payments. Credit card companies where my name was apparently still linked to accounts I'd never opened. Medical billing departments asking about charges I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson, we show you as the guarantor on this account," a woman named Janet explained during one particularly humiliating conversation. "Your son listed you as responsible for payment if he defaulted." "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What account?" "The medical financing for his wife's cosmetic surgery. $22,000 for breast augmentation and liposuction. The account is 4 months overdue." Cosmetic surgery. While I was eating canned soup and rationing my prescription medications, Sarah was getting elective procedures that cost more than my annual income. And somehow, I was responsible for paying for them. I started keeping a notebook by the phone, writing down every call, every debt, every financial obligation I'd apparently agreed to without my knowledge. The list grew longer every week. Credit cards, store financing, even a loan for Michael's boat, a boat I'd never seen, on a lake I'd never been invited to visit. How many documents had I signed over the years? How many times had I trusted them completely, putting my signature on papers I barely read because family was supposed to protect family? The isolation became complete when I stopped going to church. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a gradual withdrawal from the last community that had made me feel visible. Every Sunday, the other grandmothers would share stories about their families. Birthday parties and graduations, holidays and vacations, grandchildren who called and visited and remembered. I had nothing to share. No stories, no updates, no proof that I mattered to anyone. "How's Emma doing at Northwestern?" Mrs. Patterson asked one Sunday after service, her face bright with genuine interest. "You must be so proud." She's fine," I managed, my throat tight with the effort of speaking normally. "Doing well. And Michael's business?" I heard he's expanding. The business he'd expanded with money I couldn't afford to guarantee, that was now threatening to destroy what little credit I had left. "Yes," I said. "Expanding." I stopped going after that. The pretense was too exhausting, and the contrast between their joy and my emptiness was too painful to bear. I told myself I was protecting them from my sadness. But really, I was protecting myself from the reminder of what normal family relationships looked like. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon in July, when the air conditioning in my apartment unit broke and I couldn't afford to have it repaired. I called Michael, hoping he might know someone who could fix it cheaply, or maybe help with the cost. His voicemail picked up immediately. "You've reached Michael Thompson Construction. We're probably out building someone's dream, so leave a message and we'll get back to you." Building someone's dream. The irony was devastating. I left a message, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "Hi, honey. It's Mom. My air conditioning broke and I was wondering if you might know someone who could take a look at it. Nothing urgent. Call me when you get a chance." He never called back. I spent the next week sweltering in the 90-degree heat, using damp towels and ice packs to stay cool enough to sleep. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, noticed me sitting on the front steps trying to catch a breeze and brought me a fan from her apartment. "You need help," she said in her broken English, her dark eyes filled with concern. "Family should help. Family should help." The words echoed in my head as I lay awake that night, the borrowed fan barely moving the stifling air around my tiny bedroom. Mrs. Chen, a woman I barely knew, had shown me more kindness in 5 minutes than my own son had in months. That's when I found the Facebook photos. I'd stopped checking social media after Emma's wedding announcement, but insomnia and desperation drove me to scroll through my phone at 3 in the morning. Michael's page was full of updates I'd never seen. Photos from Emma's graduation party, the celebration I'd never been told about. Images of family barbecues in their backyard. Sarah's parents and siblings gathered around their pool, toasting with champagne and laughing at some shared joke. Emma's engagement party, Michael's birthday dinner at an expensive restaurant, Sarah's promotion celebration, a constant stream of family gatherings and special occasions that had happened without me, had never included me, had proceeded as if I'd never existed. In one photo, they were all wearing matching t-shirts that read, "Thompson Family Reunion 2023. Sarah's parents, her siblings, their children. Michael, Sarah, and Emma in the center, beaming at the camera. 3 generations of people who considered themselves family. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't at the reunion. I hadn't even known it was happening. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in my apartment like a gunshot, sharp and final. I slid from my chair to the carpet, my legs too weak to support the weight of this new understanding. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd erased me, deliberately, systematically. They'd built a new family narrative that didn't include the woman who'd made their success possible, and they were happier without me. I crawled to my bathroom and pulled myself up to the sink, gripping the porcelain edge as I stared at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Hollow-eyed, gray-skinned, bent with the weight of carrying too much for too long. When had I become so invisible? When had I learned to take up so little space that my own family could pretend I didn't exist? My hands shook as I opened the medicine cabinet, looking at the bottle of sleeping pills my doctor had prescribed for the insomnia that had plagued me since moving to this apartment. The label warned against taking more than one per night, but what did it matter? Who would find me if I took them all? Who would care? I held the bottle for a long time, feeling its weight, considering how easy it would be to just disappear completely. To stop being a burden, stop being a disappointment, stop being someone whose love was too much trouble to accept. But as I stood there in my small bathroom, surrounded by the detritus of a life lived for others, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope. I was too broken for hope, but something else. Something harder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous. Anger. I was angry at myself for being so naive, so trusting, so willing to believe that sacrifice would be rewarded with love. I was angry at them for taking everything I'd offered and then discarding me like garbage when I had nothing left to give. But mostly, I was angry that I'd let it happen. I'd been complicit in my own destruction. I'd taught them to use me by never saying no. I'd trained them to take me for granted by always being available. I'd enabled their selfishness by constantly enabling their needs. For the first time in 3 years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone worth saving. I put the sleeping pills back in the cabinet and walked to my kitchen, where I made myself a cup of tea with my good china, the set I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. I sat at my small table and thought about what it would mean to stop being their doormat, to start valuing myself as much as I'd valued them. The idea was terrifying. Without their needs to meet, their problems to solve, their lives to enable, who was I? Without sacrifice, was there anything left of Margaret Rose Thompson? But as I sipped my tea and watched the sun rise over Chicago, painting my small apartment in golden light, I began to understand that maybe it was time to find out. The first test came sooner than I'd expected. 2 days after my bathroom revelation, the phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. Sarah's voice was bright and cheerful, as if we talked every week instead of every few months. "Margaret, how are you, sweetie?" The term of endearment sent ice through my veins. Sarah only called me sweetie when she needed something. "I'm fine," I said carefully, already bracing myself for whatever request was coming. "Oh, good. Listen, I have the most wonderful news. Emma's finally ready to start looking for a house, and we found this adorable little place in Lincoln Park. The sellers are motivated, and we could get it for a steal. Only $400,000. $400,000. More money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. That's a lot of money," I said weakly. "I know it sounds like a lot, but it's actually below market value. The thing is, Emma and Tyler need to move fast on this. The mortgage company says they need a co-signer with good credit and some equity to put down. Just 20%. $80,000. $80,000. She said it like she was asking me to lend her $20 for groceries. "Sarah," I said slowly, feeling something new and unfamiliar rising in my chest. "I can't help with that." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "What do you mean you can't help?" Her voice had lost its sugary sweetness, replaced by something harder, more demanding. "Margaret, this is Emma's future we're talking about. Your granddaughter's future. I understand that, but I don't have $80,000. I don't have $8,000. I barely have $800. "That's impossible," Sarah snapped. "You've always been able to help before. What happened to all your money? What happened to all my money?" I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was more like a sob. "I gave it to you. All of it. Every penny I ever saved went to this family. Now you're being dramatic," Sarah said dismissively. "Look, we all know you're careful with money. You've always been good at saving. There has to be something you can liquidate." Liquidate. As if my life was a business to be dissolved for their benefit. "There's nothing to liquidate, Sarah. I live in a 1-bedroom rental apartment. I eat canned soup for dinner. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. There's nothing left." The line went quiet for a moment before Sarah's voice returned, colder now. "Fine. If you won't help Emma, I'll call Michael. Maybe he can talk some sense into you." She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID. and my heart rate spiked with the old familiar anxiety of disappointing him. "Mom," he said without preamble, "Sarah says you're refusing to help Emma buy a house." "I'm not refusing anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm explaining that I don't have the money to help." "Come on, Mom. Don't do this. Emma's been looking forward to this house. She's already told her friends about it. Michael, I literally don't have $80,000. I'm living on Social Security. I can barely pay rent. What about the business loan? You could use that as collateral for a home equity line of credit." My blood ran cold. "The business loan that you stopped paying? The one that's destroying my credit? That business loan? Look, things got tight for a while, but I'm catching up on the payments. The important thing is that you're still technically approved for credit based on that loan." Technically approved for credit. He wanted me to go deeper into debt that he'd created and abandoned, so Emma could buy a house she couldn't afford. "No," I said quietly. "What?" "No, I won't do it." The silence that followed was deafening. In 71 years, I'd never said no to my son, not once. The word felt foreign in my mouth, terrifying and powerful at the same time. "Mom, what's gotten into you? This isn't like you." "Maybe it should be like me," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Maybe I should have been saying no for a long time. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Should I be concerned about your mental health?" Mental health. Now I was crazy for refusing to bankrupt myself for their benefit. "My mental health is fine, Michael. I'm just tired of being your family bank." The sound he made was part laugh, part scoff. "Family bank? Mom, you're being ridiculous. This is what families do. They help each other. When have you helped me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, raw and desperate. "When have any of you helped me with anything?" "We help you all the time," he said defensively. "We call and check on you. You called to check on me once in the last 3 months, and that was to ask me to co-sign another loan. That's an exaggeration. Is it? When was the last time you visited me? When was the last time any of you remembered my birthday without me reminding you? When was the last time you asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer?" Another long silence. "Mom, you're being emotional. Let's talk about this rationally. Emma needs this house. She's starting her married life, and we want her to have every advantage. You've always wanted what's best for Emma." There it was. The emotional manipulation that had worked on me for decades. Use my love for Emma against me. Make me feel guilty for protecting my own financial survival. "I do want what's best for Emma," I said carefully, "but destroying my credit and pushing me further into poverty isn't what's best for anyone." "So you're just going to abandon your granddaughter when she needs you most?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, he was accusing me of abandonment. I abandoned her? My voice cracked. I wasn't invited to her graduation. I wasn't invited to her engagement party. I found out about her wedding from a Facebook post. Who abandoned whom? "That's different," Michael said quickly. "Those were complicated situations. Small venues, limited guest lists. You know how these things work." "No, I don't know how these things work. I know how they used to work, when family meant something more than an ATM machine." "Mom, you're being unfair." Unfair. I was being unfair. "Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you love me?" "Of course I love you. What kind of question is that? When was the last time you told me you loved me without asking for money in the same conversation?" The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. That's not fair," he said finally. "Answer the question." "I don't keep track of things like that." "I do," I said quietly. "It was 3 years ago, right before you asked me to co-sign that first business loan. 3 years, Michael. You're keeping score now? That's not healthy, Mom." Keeping score. As if remembering acts of love was pathological. "I'm not giving Emma money for a house," I said firmly. "I'm not co-signing any more loans. I'm not liquidating anything. I'm done." "Done with what?" "Done being your family's solution to every financial problem. Done sacrificing my security for people who don't even remember I exist until they need something." "Mom, you're scaring me. This isn't like you at all." "Maybe it's exactly like me. Maybe this is who I would have been all along if I hadn't been too afraid to disappoint you." The phone went quiet for a long moment before Michael's voice returned. Softer now, more calculating. Look, maybe we haven't been as attentive as we should have been. Life gets busy, you know. But we're family. Family forgives each other. Family works through problems together. There it was. The promise of reconciliation dangled like bait. All I had to do was say yes one more time, and they'd love me again. They'd include me again. They'd remember I existed. For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull, the desperate desire to buy their affection with my financial ruin. It would be so easy to say yes, to go to the bank tomorrow and sign whatever papers they put in front of me. So easy to trade my future for their temporary approval. I can't, I whispered. Can't or won't. Both. The line went dead. An hour later, Emma called. My heart leaped at the sound of her voice. My beautiful granddaughter, the light of my life, calling me for the first time in months. Grandma Maggie? Her voice was thick with tears, and my chest tightened with the old instinct to fix whatever was hurting her. Emma, sweetheart. What's wrong? Dad told me what happened. About the house. Grandma, I'm so confused. I thought you'd be happy to help me start my marriage. The manipulation was subtler coming from Emma, wrapped in hurt feelings and genuine tears, but it was manipulation nonetheless. They'd sent her to break me down, knowing I'd never been able to resist her pain. Oh, honey, I said, my voice breaking. I would help you if I could. You have to know that. But I don't have the money. But what about all the money you had before? You always seemed to have money when we needed it. Always seemed to have money. Because I'd never let them see me struggle. Never let them know the cost of my generosity. They'd never known about the meals I'd skipped to pay for their needs, the medications I'd rationed, the heat I'd kept low to save money for their emergencies. That money came from somewhere, Emma. It came from my retirement, my savings, my house. It's gone. Gone where? Gone to you, to your education, your father's business, your mother's medical bills. All of it. Every penny. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, she said finally. I know you didn't. I never wanted you to know. I wanted you to feel secure, to never worry about money the way I did when I was young. But now you don't have anything? The question was so innocent, so genuinely confused, that it broke something inside me. They'd truly never considered where the money came from, never questioned whether I could afford the constant stream of requests and demands. No, sweetheart, now I don't have anything. Emma started crying harder. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know. Nobody told me. It's not your fault, Emma. You were a child when this started. You couldn't have known. But I could have asked. I should have asked. And I should have called you more. I should have visited. The admission was like a balm on a wound I'd been carrying for years. Finally, someone in my family was acknowledging that I'd been neglected, that their silence had hurt me. Why didn't you? I asked gently. I don't know, she whispered. College was so busy, and then the engagement, and everyone said you were fine, that you liked your independence. Mom said you preferred being left alone. Sarah had told them I preferred being left alone, while I was sitting in my apartment night after night, desperate for any sign that they remembered I existed. Sarah was telling them I wanted to be isolated. I never wanted to be left alone, I said quietly. I missed you every day. Emma's sobs grew louder. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Can I come see you? Can we talk about this in person? For the first time in 3 years, someone in my family wanted to see me. Not because they needed money, not because they wanted something, but because they wanted to be with me. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Yes, please come. But even as I spoke the words, even as hope flickered in my chest for the first time in years, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was another manipulation. Was Emma's remorse genuine, or was it just a different strategy to get what they wanted? Only time would tell. But for now, for the first time in 3 years, my granddaughter was coming to see me, and that felt like a small miracle in itself. Emma arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon, carrying guilt and regret like stones in her pockets. She looked older than her 25 years, her face puffy from crying, Her designer clothes rumpled from the nervous energy that had driven her to pace my apartment hallway for 10 minutes before knocking. When I opened the door, she fell into my arms like the child she'd once been, sobbing against my shoulder with the kind of raw emotion that can't be faked. For a moment, all the hurt melted away, and I was just a grandmother holding her granddaughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and feeling her heartbeat against my chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry, Grandma." We sat on my small couch, her hand in mine, while she told me everything. How Sarah had always described me as independent and set in my ways. Someone who preferred minimal contact because family obligations overwhelmed me. How they'd convinced themselves that my silence meant contentment rather than abandonment. "Mom said you were happier without us bothering you all the time," Emma said, her voice thick with shame. "She said you'd earned the right to live your own life without family drama." Family drama. They'd reframed their neglect as respect for my independence, their abandonment as a gift of freedom I'd apparently requested. "Did you ever think to ask me if that was true?" I said gently. "No," she whispered. "And I should have. I should have called you myself instead of believing what other people told me about what you wanted." We talked for 3 hours. Emma told me about college, about her job at the marketing firm, about Tyler and their plans for the future. She showed me pictures on her phone, graduation day, the engagement party, moments I'd missed that could never be recovered. "I wanted you there," she said quietly, scrolling through photos of her graduation ceremony. "I looked for you in the audience. I kept thinking you might surprise me and show up, even though I knew you hadn't been invited." "Why wasn't I invited?" Emma's face crumpled. "Dad said it would be too complicated, too many people, too expensive to include extended family. He said you'd understand." Extended family. After raising her, paying for her education, being her primary caregiver for the first 10 years of her life, I'd been classified as extended family. "I would have understood," I said truthfully, "if someone had explained it to me, if someone had called and said the venue was small or the cost was prohibitive, but nobody called. Nobody explained. I just wasn't included." The hurt in my voice broke something in Emma. She started crying again, harder this time, with the kind of grief that comes from recognizing irreversible damage. "We can't fix this, can we?" she said. "All those missed birthdays, all those times I should have called. We can't get them back." "No," I said quietly. "We can't. But we can do better going forward, right? I can be a better granddaughter. I can call you every week. I can visit more. I can make this right." The eagerness in her voice, the desperate desire to repair what had been broken, reminded me so much of myself at her age, always believing that love could fix anything, that good intentions could overcome years of neglect. "Emma," I said carefully, "do you really want a relationship with me? Or do you want to feel better about treating me badly?" The question stopped her mid-sentence. She stared at me with wide eyes, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean? I mean, are you here because you genuinely want me in your life? Or are you here because your conscience is bothering you, and you think a few visits will make the guilt go away?" She opened her mouth to answer quickly, then stopped. For the first time since she'd arrived, she really thought about the question. "I don't know," she said finally. I think both, maybe. I do want you in my life. I missed you more than I admitted to myself. But you're right. I also want to feel better about how I've treated you." The honesty was refreshing. No manipulation, no emotional appeals, just a young woman grappling with the complexity of her own motivations. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "That means more to me than you know." "So what happens now?" she asked. "How do we move forward?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us. "Emma, I love you more than life itself. You've been the brightest light in my world since the day you were born. But I can't go back to the way things were." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't be the grandmother who's only contacted when the family needs money. I can't be the emergency fund that's activated during financial crises and ignored the rest of the time. I can't be the person who gives everything and receives nothing in return." Her face went pale. "Are you saying you don't want a relationship with me?" "I'm saying I want a real relationship, not a conditional one. Not one where your love for me is tied to my ability to solve your problems or fund your dreams. But I don't— Emma, I interrupted gently. You called me Grandma Maggie for the first time in months tonight. The first time since you needed help with the house. Before that, I was just a name in your phone that you scrolled past without calling. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with the weight of her own recognition. You're right, she whispered. Oh God, you're right. I only called when I needed something. It's a pattern that's been going on for years, I said, and it has to stop. If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship, it starts now, today, with no expectations and no financial assistance. Just two people who love each other and want to spend time together. Emma looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. What about the house? What about it? If you're not going to help us buy it, we'll lose it. Someone else will get it. Then someone else will get it, I said firmly. Emma, you're 25 years old with a college degree and a good job. Your fiancé has a successful career. If you can't afford a $400,000 house, you buy a less expensive house. Or you rent for a few more years until you can afford what you want. But this house is perfect, she said, the old whining tone creeping into her voice. It's exactly what Tyler and I dreamed about. Dreams are wonderful, I said, but they shouldn't be built on your grandmother's financial destruction. She was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, she nodded slowly. You're right, she said. It's not fair to ask you to sacrifice your security for our dreams. I got so used to you being able to fix things. I never thought about what it cost you. It cost me everything, I said simply. My house, my savings, my retirement, my peace of mind. Everything. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know you are. And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means starting fresh, with new boundaries and new expectations. Emma stayed for dinner, canned soup and crackers, which she ate without complaint. We talked about her job, her friends, her relationship with Tyler. Normal grandmother-granddaughter conversation that had nothing to do with money or favors or family obligations. When she was getting ready to leave, she turned to me with uncertainty in her eyes. What do I tell my parents about the house? You tell them the truth, that I don't have the money to help, and even if I did, I wouldn't. That they'll need to find another solution. They're going to be angry. Probably. Are you okay with that? She considered the question seriously. I think so. Actually, yes. I think I am okay with that. After Emma left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The absence of guilt. For the first time in decades, I'd said no to my family and meant it. I'd set a boundary and held it, even when faced with tears and emotional appeals. The next morning, I did something revolutionary. I went to the bank. I need to speak with someone about removing myself from several accounts, I told the customer service representative, a young man named David who looked barely old enough to have a driver's license. What type of accounts, ma'am? All of them. Every account where my name appears as a guarantor or cosigner. I want to be removed from anything I didn't personally apply for. David pulled up my file on his computer, his eyebrows rising as he scrolled through the information. Ma'am, I see 17 different accounts tied to your Social Security number. Credit cards, loans, lines of credit. Some of these show significant outstanding balances. 17 accounts. I'd known about the business loan and a few credit cards, but 17 accounts meant Michael and Sarah had been using my name and credit for years without my knowledge. I want to be removed from all of them, I said firmly. Well, that's complicated. Once you're a guarantor on an account, you're legally responsible for the debt until it's paid off. Removing yourself would require the primary account holder to qualify for the debt independently. And given the current balance and payment history, you're saying I'm stuck with their debt forever? Not forever, but until the debt is satisfied. Yes, ma'am. I felt the old familiar panic rising in my chest, the same helpless feeling that had plagued me for months as collection calls poured in and my credit score plummeted. But then something else rose to meet it. Determination. What would happen if I declared bankruptcy? David's eyes widened. Bankruptcy? Ma'am, that's a very serious step. It would affect your credit for 7 to 10 years. My credit is already destroyed, I said. What else would it affect? We spent the next hour going through the implications of bankruptcy. Yes, it would wipe out my responsibility for most of the debt Michael and Sarah had accumulated in my name. Yes, it would prevent creditors from coming after my Social Security income. Yes, it would give me a fresh start financially. The downside was minimal. I had no assets to lose, no credit worth protecting, no financial reputation left to salvage. I'll need to think about it, I told David, but even as I spoke the words, I knew I'd already made my decision. That afternoon, I called a bankruptcy attorney whose ad I'd seen on daytime television. The consultation was free, and the lawyer, a woman named Patricia Mills who was close to my own age, laid out my options with compassionate clarity. Mrs. Thompson, you're what we call an ideal candidate for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, she said, reviewing the mountain of paperwork I'd brought with me. You have minimal assets, fixed income, and overwhelming debt that wasn't incurred for your own benefit. The court will discharge most of this debt, and you'll be free from the financial obligations that are currently destroying your quality of life. How long does it take? 4 to 6 months for the process to complete. You'll need to attend a creditor's meeting, but given your circumstances, it's mostly a formality. And then it's over? All of it? All of it, she confirmed. You'll start fresh with a clean slate. A clean slate. After 71 years of carrying other people's burdens, the possibility of starting over felt like a miracle. That evening, I called Michael to tell him about my decision. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anger. Mom, Emma told us about your conversation yesterday. I think you're making a huge mistake. Actually, Michael, I'm correcting a huge mistake. I'm filing for bankruptcy. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You're what? I'm declaring bankruptcy. All the debt you and Sarah accumulated in my name will be discharged. I'll no longer be responsible for your business loan, her credit cards, or any of the other accounts you opened using my credit. You can't do that, he said, panic creeping into his voice. That debt keeps my business operational. If you discharge it, the bank will come after me directly. Yes, I said calmly. They will. Mom, you'll ruin me. You'll destroy everything I've built. Everything he'd built with my money, my credit, my sacrifice. Everything I'd made possible and he'd taken credit for. No, Michael. I'm simply stopping the destruction of myself. What happens to you after that is your responsibility. This is insane, he said, his voice rising. You're having some kind of breakdown. You need professional help. I am getting professional help. From a bankruptcy attorney. The papers will be filed next week. I won't let you do this. You can't stop me, I said quietly. It's my debt to discharge, my credit to rebuild, my life to save. The line went dead. For the first time in 3 years, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about money. For the first time in decades, I woke up looking forward to the day ahead instead of dreading the obligations it might bring. I was finally, truly, free. They came like a storm 3 days later. I was having my morning coffee, reading a library book in my armchair when the pounding started on my door. Not knocking, pounding, urgent, demanding, desperate. Mom, open the door! We need to talk! Michael's voice carried through the thin walls of my apartment building, loud enough to wake the neighbors. I heard Mrs. Chen's door creak open down the hall, her worried voice asking if everything was okay. I set down my coffee cup with surprisingly steady hands. I'd known this moment would come, had been preparing for it since I'd filed the bankruptcy papers. But instead of fear, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Margaret! Sarah's voice joined Michael's, shrill and panicked. We know you're in there. We need to discuss this like adults. Like adults. As if I'd been the child in this relationship, as if my decision to protect myself was somehow immature. I walked to the door but didn't open it. You can say whatever you need to say from out there. Mom, don't be ridiculous, let us in. No. The word felt like steel in my mouth. Through the peephole, I could see them both. Michael in his expensive suit, face red with anger. Sarah in her designer clothes, mascara smudged from tears that I suspected were more about money than any genuine remorse. Mom, Michael said, switching to the patient tone he might use with a confused child. I think there's been a misunderstanding. You're making decisions that affect all of us without thinking them through. I've thought about nothing else for months, I replied through the door. I filed for bankruptcy because I can't afford the debt you accumulated in my name. That's not a misunderstanding. That's survival. Survival? Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. Margaret, you're being dramatic. We're family. Families work through problems together. Families work through problems together. The irony was breathtaking. Where was the family when I was eating canned soup every night because I couldn't afford groceries? Where was the family when my air conditioning broke and I sat in 90-degree heat for a week? Silence. I'll tell you where the family was, I continued, my voice growing stronger. The family was posting pictures on Facebook of expensive vacations and dinner parties I wasn't invited to. That's not fair, Michael said. Those were business events, networking opportunities. You wouldn't have enjoyed them. I opened the door then, needing them to see my face when I spoke. You decided what I would and wouldn't enjoy without asking me. You decided I preferred to be alone without consulting me. You decided I was too old, too boring, too much trouble to include. And now you want me to keep paying for the privilege of being ignored. They stepped back, startled by the quiet fury in my voice. In the harsh hallway light, they looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. We're sorry if we made you feel excluded, Sarah said, her voice taking on the saccharine tone she used when she wanted something. But destroying our financial stability isn't going to fix hurt feelings. Hurt feelings. 3 years of abandonment. Decades of exploitation. Reduced to hurt feelings. This isn't about hurt feelings, I said slowly. This is about the fact that you used me. All of you. You saw me as a resource to be depleted, not a person to be loved. That's not true, Michael protested. We love you. No, you love what I could do for you. There's a difference. I reached into my apartment and pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this moment. Inside were printouts of all the Facebook photos I'd saved. Every family gathering I'd been excluded from. Every celebration that had happened without me. I want you to look at these, I said, spreading the photos on the hallway floor between us. Emma's graduation party. Your anniversary celebration. Christmas morning last year. Sarah's birthday dinner. Michael's promotion party. They stared down at the images, their faces growing pale as they realized what they were seeing. Count how many family photos you can find with me in them, I said quietly. Count how many times you thought to include the woman who made all your happiness possible. Sarah knelt down and picked up one of the photos. Emma's engagement party, held in their backyard under twinkling lights I would have loved to see. We thought, she began, then stopped. You thought what? We thought you'd be uncomfortable. All those young people, all the noise. We thought you'd prefer to stay home. You never asked what I'd prefer. You decided for me. And then you convinced yourselves you were doing me a favor by excluding me. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. Maybe we made some mistakes, he said reluctantly. But that doesn't justify what you're doing now. The bankruptcy will destroy my business. Everything I've worked for will be gone. Everything you worked for with my money, I corrected. Built on my credit, funded by my sacrifice. Maybe it's time you learned to build something that belongs to you. You're being vindictive, Sarah accused, her mask of sweetness finally slipping. This is revenge. Pure and simple. If I wanted revenge, I said calmly, I would have done this 3 years ago when you first started ignoring me. This isn't revenge. It's self-preservation. I gathered up the photos and stood, feeling taller than I had in years. I spent 71 years believing that love meant giving until you had nothing left. I gave you my money, my time, my energy, my future. I gave you everything except my respect for myself. Mom, I'm not finished. My voice cut through Michael's interruption like a blade. I taught you to use me by never saying no. I enabled your selfishness by always being available to solve your problems. I created monsters by feeding them everything I had. Sarah's face crumpled. You're calling us monsters? I'm calling your behavior monstrous. There's a difference. For the first time since they'd arrived, Emma appeared at the end of the hallway. She must have been waiting in the car, sent up as reinforcement when their initial assault failed. Grandma? She said tentatively. walking toward us with cautious steps. "Hello, sweetheart. Are you really going through with the bankruptcy?" "Yes." "Even though it will hurt Dad's business?" I looked at my granddaughter. This beautiful young woman I'd helped raise, educate, and launch into the world, and felt the last piece of my old self die. "Emma, let me ask you something. If your father's business depends on destroying my financial security, do you think that's a business worth saving?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, the implications of the question sinking in. "I didn't think about it that way," she said softly. "None of you did. You thought about what you needed, what you wanted, what would make your lives easier. You never thought about what it cost me to provide it." Michael stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "So what now? You're just going to cut us out of your life completely? Punish us forever for not being perfect?" "I'm not cutting you out," I said. "I'm establishing boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means you call me because you want to hear my voice, not because you need money. It means you invite me to family gatherings because I'm family, not because you feel obligated. It means you treat me like a person you love, not like an ATM you visit when you're desperate." The hallway fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "And if we can't do that?" Michael asked quietly. "Then we don't have a relationship," I said simply. "And that will be your choice, not mine." I turned toward my apartment door, then paused. "I want you to understand something," I said without looking back. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. I'm just done. Done being used. Done being taken for granted. Done sacrificing myself for people who never learned to appreciate the sacrifice." "Mom," Emma said, her voice breaking. I turned to face her one last time. "I love you, Emma. I love all of you. But I love myself too, and I should have learned that lesson a long time ago." I walked into my apartment and closed the door behind me, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click that echoed through the hallway like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Through the door, I heard Sarah start to cry. Real tears this time, not the manipulative kind. I heard Michael's voice, low and urgent, talking rapidly about lawyers and options and ways to fight the bankruptcy. But for the first time in my adult life, their crisis wasn't my crisis. Their problems weren't my problems. Their panic wasn't my responsibility. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and returned to my book. Outside my window, Chicago carried on with its endless rhythm, and inside my small apartment, Margaret Rose Thompson was finally, completely free. The silence after they left wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. For the first time in decades, I woke up without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. No dread about phone calls demanding money I didn't have. No guilt about disappointing people who had never tried not to disappoint me. Just silence. And in that silence, the radical idea that I might actually matter. The bankruptcy proceedings moved through the courts with surprising efficiency. Patricia Mills, my attorney, called every few weeks with updates that sounded like news from another planet. Debts discharged, creditors satisfied, credit score gradually climbing from the ashes of financial destruction. "Mrs. Thompson," she said during one of our final meetings, "you're officially debt-free. Every account that was dragging you down has been cleared. You're starting fresh." Starting fresh. At 71, I was getting a second chance at life. The first thing I did was something so simple it felt revolutionary. I bought myself new clothes. Not from the clearance rack at discount stores, but from a real department store with helpful salespeople who treated me like a customer worth their time. A soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes. Comfortable shoes that didn't pinch my feet. A winter coat that actually kept me warm instead of just covering my body. The woman in the dressing room mirror was a stranger. Shoulders straight instead of hunched with the weight of other people's problems. Face relaxed instead of tight with perpetual worry. When had I started looking so defeated? When had I learned to make myself so small? "That color is beautiful on you," the saleswoman said as I modeled the blue sweater. "It makes you glow. Glow." I couldn't remember the last time someone had used that word to describe me. I started taking walks through Lincoln Park, the neighborhood where Emma had wanted to buy that expensive house. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was exploring the area my granddaughter thought she deserved while I learned to deserve things for myself. The park was beautiful in autumn, the trees blazing with colors that seemed more vivid than I remembered. Had the world always been this bright, or had I been too preoccupied with other people's needs to notice? On my third walk, I discovered the community center. It was a brick building that had seen better days, but the people streaming in and out looked happy, engaged, alive in ways that I envied. A sign by the door advertised classes, watercolor painting, book clubs, cooking lessons, computer skills for seniors. I stood outside for 20 minutes watching people come and go, before finally working up the courage to walk inside. "Can I help you?" The receptionist was a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a name tag that read Dolores. I was wondering about the classes," I said, my voice rusty from months of talking only to myself. "Which ones interest you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't done anything for myself in so long. I'm not sure what I like anymore." Dolores smiled with the understanding of someone who'd heard that confession before. "Why don't you try a few different things? First class is always free. See what speaks to you." What spoke to me turned out to be watercolor painting. I hadn't held a paintbrush since high school art class, but something about the way the colors bloomed and blended on wet paper felt like meditation. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Helen, encouraged us to paint whatever brought us joy. "Don't worry about making it perfect," she said, moving between our easels like a gentle conductor. "Art isn't about perfection. It's about expression. Expression." I'd forgotten that I had anything to express beyond worry and sacrifice. My first painting was terrible. A muddy landscape that looked like a child's attempt at abstract art. But it was mine. I'd created something that existed purely because I wanted it to exist, not because someone else needed it or expected it or would benefit from it. I hung it on my refrigerator like a proud child. The book club met on Wednesday evenings in the center's small library. The current selection was A Man Called Ove by Frederick Backman, a story about an elderly man learning to find purpose after loss. The parallels to my own life weren't subtle, but they were comforting. "What did you think of Ove's journey?" asked Ruth, the club's moderator, during my first meeting. I said slowly, "he had to lose everything he thought he was before he could discover who he actually was." The other members nodded knowingly. Most of them were my age or older, people who'd experienced their own versions of loss and rediscovery. There was Margaret P. We called her Margaret P. to avoid confusion, whose husband of 50 years had passed and left her wondering who she was beyond wife. There was Frank, whose corporate career had ended in forced early retirement and a pension that barely covered his expenses. There was Rosa, whose children had moved across the country and visited once a year, leaving her feeling like a stranger in her own family story. We were all refugees from lives that had stopped working, finding community in our shared experience of starting over. "The beautiful thing about being invisible," Frank said one evening as we discussed a particularly moving passage, "is that nobody notices when you start becoming visible again." He was right. My family had become so accustomed to my absence that they weren't monitoring my recovery. Michael stopped calling after the bankruptcy was finalized. Sarah unfriended me on Facebook, a digital slap that stung less than I'd expected. Emma sent a few tentative text messages that I answered kindly but briefly. They'd moved on, and for the first time in my adult life, so had I. I started volunteering at the community center's food pantry on Saturday mornings. The work reminded me of my years at the diner, service work that required efficiency and compassion, but with a crucial difference. I was choosing to help people who needed assistance, not being manipulated into providing for people who could afford to help themselves. "Mrs. Thompson," said James, a young father picking up groceries for his family, "you saved my kids' Christmas. I don't know how to thank you." The gratitude in his eyes was genuine, uncomplicated by entitlement or expectation. He wasn't thanking me because he thought he deserved my help. He was grateful because he recognized it as a gift. I'd forgotten what healthy appreciation looked like. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Chicago in snow that transformed the city into something magical. I'd always hated winter. The cold, the isolation, the way darkness fell so early it felt like the world was giving up. But this winter felt different. I had places to go, people to see, activities that gave shape to my days. On Christmas Eve, the community center hosted a potluck dinner for anyone who didn't have family plans. I almost didn't go. The old Margaret would have spent the evening alone, wallowing in self-pity about the family that had forgotten her. But the new Margaret was curious about what Christmas might feel like without obligation and resentment. The center's main room was decorated with handmade ornaments and twinkling lights that cast warm shadows on the walls. About 30 people had gathered. Singles, elderly couples, immigrants far from home, young families on tight budgets. We were a collection of misfits and outsiders, but somehow that made us perfect for each other. Would anyone like to share what they're grateful for this year? Asked Helen, our painting instructor, who'd organized the event. Hands went up around the room. People talked about new friendships, second chances, small victories over big challenges. When it was my turn, I stood on slightly shaking legs. I'm grateful, I said, that I finally learned the difference between being needed and being used. The room erupted in understanding applause. Several people wiped their eyes, and I realized I wasn't the only one who'd had to learn that lesson the hard way. After dinner, we played board games and shared stories. Frank told us about his grandchildren in Seattle who video called him every Sunday. Rosa showed us photos of the garden she was planning for spring. Margaret P. talked about the pottery class she'd started, how working with clay reminded her that broken things could be reshaped into something beautiful. I told them about my watercolor paintings, about the cooking class I was planning to take, about the possibility of traveling, something I'd dreamed about for decades but never thought I could afford. Where would you go? Asked Dolores. Maine, I said without hesitation. I've always wanted to see the lighthouses. So go, said Frank simply. What's stopping you? What was stopping me? For the first time in my life, the answer was nothing. No debt, no family obligations, no one else's needs to consider before my own. I had enough money saved from not paying other people's bills to take a modest trip, and more importantly, I had permission from myself to spend money on my own happiness. That night, I went home and looked up lighthouses online. Portland Head Light, Bass Harbor Head, Pemaquid Point, names that sounded like poetry, places that existed purely for their own beauty rather than their utility to others. I booked a trip for spring. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. There were still mornings when I woke up feeling guilty for spending money on myself instead of sending it to family members who might need it. There were still evenings when I missed the chaos of feeling essential to someone else's survival, even if that survival had come at the cost of my own. But those moments grew shorter and less frequent as winter turned to spring. I was learning to fill the space that had been occupied by other people's crises with my own interests, my own friendships, my own quiet joy. Emma called on my 72nd birthday, not to ask for money or help, but to wish me happy birthday and tell me she'd been thinking about our last conversation. I've been going to therapy, she said quietly, talking about family patterns and healthy boundaries. I think I understand now why you had to do what you did. How are you doing? I asked. With the house situation? We found something smaller, more affordable. It's perfect for us right now, and maybe someday we'll be able to afford something bigger. But we'll afford it ourselves. Pride swelled in my chest. Not the old pride of having solved someone else's problem, but the new pride of watching someone learn to solve their own problems. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it. Can I come visit sometime? Not because I need anything, just because I miss you. I'd like that very much. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted in me during that conversation. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that had consumed me for months had dissolved somewhere between the watercolor classes and the book club discussions, between helping strangers at the food pantry and planning my lighthouse trip. I'd found something better than revenge or resentment. I'd found myself. Spring arrived like a revelation, and with it came the certainty that Margaret Rose Thompson was no longer a woman who existed solely to serve others. She was a woman who painted imperfect landscapes and read novels that made her think and looked forward to her first real vacation in 40 years. She was a woman who mattered, all by herself. 1 year later, I stood on the rocky coast of Maine, watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of gold and rose. The lighthouse behind me, Portland Head Light, rose from the cliffs like a beacon of hope, its white tower catching the early morning light and throwing it back to the world in defiant brilliance. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and I pulled my new red jacket closer. Red, a color I'd never worn before, thinking it too bold, too attention-seeking for someone like me. But the woman I'd become wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. My small suitcase sat beside me on the bench where I'd come to watch the sunrise. Inside were watercolor supplies, a journal I'd started keeping, and souvenirs from a week of pure self-indulgence. Museums I'd wandered through at my own pace, restaurants where I'd eaten alone without feeling ashamed, bookstores where I'd bought novels I wanted to read simply because they interested me. For 7 days, I'd answered to no one but myself. No phone calls asking for money. No guilt about spending my Social Security check on experiences instead of other people's emergencies. No constant calculation of what I could afford to give away versus what I needed to survive. I was 72 years old, and I'd just taken my first real vacation. The lighthouse keeper, a weathered man named Tom who'd worked there for 30 years, had told me about the storms that battered this coast. People think lighthouses are just pretty decoration, he'd said, polishing the massive lens that guided ships to safety. But they're working buildings. They save lives every day by standing firm when everything around them is chaos. Standing firm when everything around them is chaos. I'd thought about those words all week, recognizing something of myself in that description. I'd finally learned to be my own lighthouse, a steady beacon that guided my own ship to safety, even when the people I loved were determined to crash on the rocks of their own making. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How's Maine, Grandma? I can't wait to see your paintings." She'd been visiting regularly since our conversation on my birthday. Real visits where we talked about books and current events and her job instead of money and family drama. She'd brought Tyler once, a nice young man who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me rather than assessing my financial utility. They were happy in their smaller house, proud of paying their own mortgage, building a life that belonged to them. Michael had called twice in the past year. The first time was to inform me that his business had survived the loss of the loan I'd guaranteed, though he'd had to downsize and give up the expensive office lease. The second call came 6 months later, when Sarah filed for divorce, and he needed someone to talk to about the pain of being left by someone he'd thought would never leave. I'd listened without offering solutions. I'd sympathized without writing checks. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in decades. "I don't understand how she could just walk away," he'd said, his voice thick with confusion and hurt. "Sometimes," I'd replied gently, "people reach a point where staying costs more than leaving." He'd been quiet for a long time after that. "Mom," he'd said finally, "I think I owe you an apology." "You think?" I know I do. We all do." The apology when it came was imperfect but genuine. No excuses about being busy or misunderstanding my needs. Just acknowledgement that they'd taken advantage of my love and treated me like a resource instead of a person. I'd forgiven him, but forgiveness hadn't meant forgetting. It meant accepting the past without letting it poison the present. It meant loving my son while maintaining the boundaries that protected my newfound peace. As the sun climbed higher over the Atlantic, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today I learned that lighthouses don't run around the ocean rescuing drowning sailors. They stand in one place, shining their light steadily, and ships use that light to navigate to safety. I spent 71 years trying to be a rescue boat, exhausting myself trying to save people who weren't interested in being saved. Now I'm learning to be a lighthouse instead. Steady, bright, useful, but not responsible for every ship that passes by." The journal was full of such observations, insights that had come slowly as I'd built a life that belonged to me. I'd discovered that I loved mystery novels, had strong opinions about local politics, and possessed a talent for making friends that had been dormant for decades. I'd learned that I could live comfortably on my Social Security check when I wasn't supporting other people's lifestyles, that small pleasures could bring enormous joy, that being alone wasn't the same thing as being lonely. Most importantly, I'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling dressed up in pretty language. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment, The old anxiety flickered. Unknown numbers had once meant collection agencies and demands for payment on debt I hadn't created, but that life was over. I answered without fear. "Is this Margaret Thompson?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "Yes, this is Margaret. Mrs. Thompson, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a social worker at Chicago General Hospital, and I have a patient here, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, who's been asking for you. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor from the apartment building, the kind woman who'd brought me a fan when my air conditioning broke and noticed when I looked lonely. Is she all right?" I asked, already calculating how quickly I could get back to Chicago. "She's stable, but she had a fall and broke her hip. She'll need surgery and then rehabilitation. The thing is, she doesn't have any family in the area, and she mentioned that you'd been kind to her. She wondered if you might be able to help coordinate her care." The old Margaret would have panicked, would have cut her vacation short, and rushed back to become Mrs. Chen's unpaid caregiver, would have taken responsibility for another person's crisis without considering her own limitations. The new Margaret paused, thought, and then asked questions. What kind of help does she need? What resources are available through the hospital? How long is her expected recovery time? Jennifer explained the situation thoroughly. Mrs. Chen needed someone to check on her apartment, water her plants, and coordinate with the rehabilitation facility. Simple tasks that would require a few hours a week, not a complete sacrifice of my own life. "I can help with those things," I said, "but I won't be back in Chicago until Sunday. Can someone handle the immediate needs until then?" "Of course. Thank you so much, Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Chen will be so relieved." After I hung up, I realized what had just happened. Someone had asked for my help, and I'd said yes, but on my own terms, within my own limits, without abandoning my own needs. I was learning to be generous without being self-destructive, helpful without being exploited. The lighthouse beam swept across the water as evening approached, its rhythm steady and sure. I packed my things and headed back to my hotel, where I'd spend one more night in Maine before returning to Chicago and the life I'd built from the ashes of the life I'd lost. But first, I had dinner to enjoy at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, a glass of wine to savor, and a sunset to watch from my hotel window. Mrs. Chen's needs could wait until I was ready to address them. Her crisis didn't automatically become my emergency. The woman who'd arrived in Maine a week ago, anxious, eager to please, ready to sacrifice her own pleasure for someone else's urgent request, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that helping others was a choice, not an obligation, and that maintaining her own well-being was the foundation that made genuine generosity possible. 3 months later, I stood in the community center's main room, hanging my latest watercolor paintings for the annual art show. The Lighthouse series, 12 paintings of the Maine coast, had taken me 2 months to complete, working slowly and patiently to capture not just the buildings, but the feelings they'd inspired. "These are extraordinary," said Helen, standing back to admire the collection. "You've really found your voice as an artist." My voice as an artist. I'd spent 7 decades thinking I didn't have a voice worth hearing, and now I was discovering it in brushstrokes and color choices, in the way I captured light on water and the defiant beauty of structures that stood firm against storms. Emma arrived for the opening reception with Tyler and a surprise guest. Michael, looking uncomfortable but trying to make an effort. He'd been slowly working to rebuild our relationship, respecting my boundaries while attempting to show genuine interest in my life. "Mom," he said, standing before the lighthouse paintings with wonder in his eyes. "These are incredible. I had no idea you were so talented." "Neither did I admitted. "I never had time to find out." The unspoken truth hung between us. I'd never had time because I'd spent all my time solving his problems and funding his dreams. But we were both learning to navigate conversations without stepping on the landmines of our shared past. "I'd like to buy one," he said quietly. "If you're selling them." "You don't have to." "I want to. Not because I feel guilty, but because they're beautiful and I want to support your work." I selected a painting of Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse at sunset, its beam cutting through purple clouds to illuminate a path across dark water. As I wrote up the sales slip, I realized this was the first time Michael had ever paid me for anything, instead of the other way around. The art show was a success, Several paintings sold to community center members and neighborhood residents who'd watched my transformation over the past year. But more than the money, I treasured the conversations. People sharing how my story had inspired them to set their own boundaries, pursue their own interests, reclaim their own lives from the demands of ungrateful family members. "You gave us permission to matter," said Margaret P., purchasing the painting of Portland Head Light that had started my lighthouse obsession. "You showed us that we could choose ourselves without being selfish." Late that evening, after the reception had ended and the paintings had been carefully wrapped for their new owners, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea and thought about the question I'd been asked a year ago. Was I used? The answer was still yes. I had been used, exploited, taken for granted by people who should have loved me better. But I'd also learned that being used was a choice I'd made again and again, because I'd been afraid that saying no would mean being alone. Now I knew that being alone was infinitely better than being used. That solitude was a gift, not a punishment. That I could love people without sacrificing myself for them, could be generous without being a doormat, could matter without being needed. The lighthouse on my wall, Michael's purchase, now hanging in place of honor above my small dining table, reminded me daily that my job wasn't to rescue everyone who sailed into my life. My job was to shine my light steadily and let others use it to navigate their own way to safety. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized from the broken person who'd contemplated ending her life in this same room just 18 months ago. The face looking back at me was lined with age but bright with purpose. The eyes were clear, the shoulders straight, the expression peaceful. I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction, that sometimes saving yourself is the only way to truly help anyone else, that your own life has value, even when the people you love most seem determined to convince you otherwise. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? I asked my reflection. Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot to love yourself? If you're listening to this story and nodding your head, if you recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, then know this. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to matter. It's never too late to shine your own light instead of burning yourself up to keep others warm. Your life has value beyond what you can give to others. You matter, not because of what you do for people, but because you exist. And sometimes, the most radical act of love is learning to say no. If my story has touched your heart, if you've ever felt like that forgotten mother or grandmother, share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like if you believe that we all deserve to matter. Subscribe so this reaches someone else who needs permission to choose themselves. Because in the end, we're all lighthouses, meant to shine our own light, stand firm in our own storms, and guide ourselves safely home.